Hi, class. So today we're coming to the conclusion of the Gender and Leadership unit. And so today we're going to want to review some of our previous lessons, as we haven't had that much contact. The previous lessons have been more exploratory, where I'm presenting you with ideas, a case study, a video, a concept, or a thought, and forcing you to, I guess, reflect on what it might mean or how it might actually make you feel, good or bad. So today we're going to review a little bit. And so the first thing I want to touch base on is the case study that I had you all read. Some of you had the Heidi case study, some of you had the Carl case study, and Sheryl Sandberg actually referenced the same idea. The name was Carl, the name was Howard. It explores the implicit prejudice or the implicit bias that we all have regarding expectations of male versus female authority, and potentially how you might view either of them as your boss or their competencies. And so the first thing is to kind of recognize and see that yes, our poll results did show differences in reactions. We all understand that the poll was extraordinarily small sample sized, and it does not cannot vet to see if people already had biases from before, if those same people would not have wanted to work for Carl or whatnot. Regardless, we do see a difference. We also see the fact that people who thought that Heidi was qualified still wouldn't want to work for her. Again, we don't know if they would not have wanted to work for Carl, but still, there are differences. And in Sheryl Sandberg's video, she talked about how this happened in a university lecture hall in a university case where the same kind of thing happened, right? And so, again, I don't know the data on her study, but you can see that it's not like an only you kind of thing, right? And I hope that all of you can kind of realize that there is some, whether it's implicit or whether it's sexism or whether it's something totally entirely different, there are things that are holding our ability to judge people fairly in question. And if that means that an entire, cohort of our population is going to look down upon for certain skills, while the other half of it is looked well on with those skills, then that is a problem. And so we need to understand that this is a problem that exists, that is getting better, of course it is. We are better off than we were 15 years ago, 20 years ago, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but it still exists. And I think we can all agree that some of those things still exist in our psyche and our mentality and in our subconscious. So the second part of the module was to kind of view the Suits clip that I showed you with Jessica Pearson and Rachel Zane, them talking about this exact thing. And so, again, we know this is a fictional depiction of the world. We know that some writer put this in, but the fact that this is a very, very popular, recent show talking about these actual issues, almost give it more credence, almost let it hopefully hold value, that people are writing about these things. Maybe it is to sensationalize a little bit, I don't know, but it is something that is on people's minds, and that is an issue, and it has been an ongoing issue, so much so that they're going to write about it and want to talk about it and deal with it in the now in a TV show. And the reflection on that is to kind of think about, does this exist? Do women need to change their mode of operation, or need to accept different, criteria or expectations if they want to reach the same heights as typical men do, at a higher cost? Again, it's not that I have an answer for you necessarily, but it wants you to engage in the conversation and look at what's going on here that needs to kind of be dealt with, or needs to be brought up, or at least this needs to be recognized as something. How widespread you believe it is, or widespread you don't believe it is, it exists in some form or the other. Okay? The third thing was the video that Sheryl Sandberg wrote about. And so a few things that I want to point out. This one, it was a video that was targeted at women. And so sometimes I'll have gentlemen watch the video and kind of say things like they didn't like it, they didn't care how it made them feel, or whatnot, right? And so we recognize that there's already prejudice in it, right? There's prejudice, obviously, in her speaking about it, because She's speaking from a specific point of view, but even the audience that we have prejudice as we hear it. I even had a gentleman once, this is a couple of years ago, he actually said, if it was coming from a man, I would have, listened better. That in itself is it's so outlandish to say because that's the bias that already exists. He did not appreciate being talked to like that by a woman or whatever it was, right? So she brings up many points about how men are depicted versus how women are depicted. She also takes a very good, I guess, a balanced natured approach where this is not only a man problem. This is a woman problem in terms of how she says that women need to deal with what they want to deal with, or if they want corporate life, if they want to climb that ladder. There are things that need to change about how women approach these things, right? So she just wants to bring light to a topic that needs to be talked about. So you might be asking, so what's the point? Why are we talking about this? We already talked about ethics. We already talked about biases. Why are we talking about it again in terms of leadership, right? And so in reality, you're right. We're not here to talk about the implicit prejudice or potentially those types of things that women face in the workforce, right? That's not the point in this area, even though that is an issue, and even though that leadership in itself is to destroy some of these biases and to break down some of these barriers. But what we're trying to look at is to kind of bridge this gap between our thoughts about what good leadership is and where does gender, if at all, have to do with this. And so let's ask a few questions, right? So one, is a woman's leadership style different from a man's? Some people will say yes, some people will say no. Whatever your answer may be, some people do make distinctions. And so the question is, what are those distinctions? Are those distinctions good? What makes a woman's leadership style different than a man's, and why? Okay. Question number 2 is, what is the difference between a man's style and a woman's style? Some might talk about authoritarian, some might talk about relationships. All those things may or may not be true. Again, these are not specific to men and women, but these are kind of more generalizations. And so in today's lesson, there's going to be a lot of generalizing, but it's not meant to oversimplify things. More it's just to kind of recognize characteristics. And third question is, who are better leaders, men or women? Again, this is up for massive debate, and I'm going to say neither. It's not a men versus women thing, but let's explore why I'm even asking these questions. So, if I was to say typically, or I would say stereotypically, you might look at women managers being more at interaction, more about communicating, listening, potentially about motivating. That could be arguable. But do women communicate better? Do women listen better? Again, these are not hard and fast rules. These are often just kind of generalizations. Women managers typically are more democratic and more participative. They will focus on building consensus and good relationships. And these characteristics are all what people see as in leaders that are transformational. And so what do I mean by transformational leaders? People who are able to transform organizations or transform culture or to change mode of operation, right? And so these are very, very good characteristics to have in your leadership. Well, historically, again, now it's changing where we have come a long way in history, but historically men have been much more known to use transactional approaches, be very direct, be very assertive, be very command-oriented, right? And so if you even look at these two characteristics, these two categories, you're going to see distinct differences, right? You're going to see that the whole women category looks much more like behavioral managers, and the whole men category looks much more like classical managers. And again, we've already talked about how we have kind of changed to a much more behavioral approach in terms of leadership. And while we know classical approaches aren't gone and they're useful in certain circumstances, but in terms of creating change, creating movements, these behavioral manager styles are much more effective. So the question is, why is this happening? Why is there this shift from this classical to this behavioral to this interactivity versus the transactional? The reality is that the world has changed, right? Diversity is much more commonplace. The knowledge economy is something that we are striving for and want to create and want to cultivate. Global perspectives, more multinational firms, much more trade, much more um, you know teams that are from different countries, much more partnering, right? So all these things exist in a massively greater quantity than before. And so if these things exist more now, we need much more ability to be interactive, to be communicative, to be relational, versus this command style approach where it's my way or the highway. I order you to do this. You have to do this, right? That method does not work so well anymore, right? So the question again, we're coming back to, are women better leaders, right? And so um, I will say not necessarily. Are men better leaders? Again, not necessarily. It's not necessarily the gender characteristics, but it's the characteristics in general, right? We want leaders to have a certain cluster or grouping of characteristics that will make them more effective, right? And so yesterday's reading talked about what characteristics that people see more in women, and those characteristics and how they translate into leadership. And so often in that article it talked about how women possessed more of these characteristics, yet we're not in higher leadership positions, right? So the characteristics are the important part, not necessarily the gender, right? So what do we need, right? We need openness, we need relationships, we need support, empowerment, et cetera, right? So all these things, regardless of if they come from a man or from a woman, are necessary, right? All these things are needed to take businesses, countries, humanity to a different state, to a different stage, right? So we need to understand that these characteristics are the key to innovative solutions. They're the key to solving global crises, right? So we want more of these characteristics. And so the question now is that why do we think that stereotypically women have more of these qualities than men? And so that's a loaded question. We don't necessarily know 100% where this first of all, where this thought process came from. But I definitely think that it has a lot to do with culture, has a lot to do with upbringing, has a lot to do with genetics. But regardless of why, we see lots of these things happening. And we see lots of these negative characteristics in lots of these men. And so, and again, maybe if there were more women in power, we'd see more of these negative characteristics in women, and we'd see more positives in men too. But again, we don't know. We just want to look for the characteristics. We want to look for these qualities, right? And so let's explore another quote. Okay, this is by Tony Schwartz. It's from a reading what women know about leadership that men don't. This is assigned for homework as well. But the quote is this: "No single challenge has been greater for me as a leader than learning how to take better care of the people I lead, and to create a safe, supportive space in which they can thrive. Like most men I know, I grew up with very little modeling around empathy, the ability to recognize, experience, and be sensitive to what others are feeling." Again, and if we were in class right now, I would poll you. I'd ask you, like, how many men can relate to this statement, right? I know personally for myself, I can. I'm from an immigrant family, from a very, very patriarchal society. Empathy and those kinds of things were not part of our regular, dinner conversations. It was not something that I would have experienced at home very much, right? And so if that's your upbringing, that's what you know, that's what you believe, that's how you kind of operate, right? And so if men are not taught these things, well, women are taught these things to a greater degree. Like, I don't know, can we agree on that men are not taught this as much as women? Well, if they're not taught this as much as women, then it leads us to think that women probably have better skills at these types of things. Regardless of if you think these types of things are good for leadership or not, these types of things women may have more of, right? Because they've been taught them more, right? So that's a very upbringing type of thing. So this is very emotional intelligence like, right? So now we're kind of mixing up units here, right? So we've already gone through the emotional intelligence unit, and we've talked about why emotional intelligence breeds good leaders, better leaders, why it's so important. And so if we think that women have more emotional intelligence, then that may be why they are better leaders. Again, I'm not saying they do, but again, it's the characteristics. We want to seek out and search for these characteristics. So the next point I want you to reflect on is how you respond to threats. Okay, and so if we were here talking, I'd ask the gentleman, when you feel threatened, either physically or socially or emotionally or whatnot, how do you typically respond, or even how have you been taught to respond? And often people will say, I'll be aggressive back, or I'll want to fight, or I'll get into a scrap, which is why generally gentlemen have, we get into fist fights way more often, right? And then if I talk to women and ask them, lots of times, the answer may be the same sometimes, but lots of times they will seek out protection, right? They will seek to exit the scenario or not want to be part of it, or the emotions will get too much. And so it's a very different reaction oftentimes. Again, it's not always, but often it's a very different reaction. So in this scenario, aggression equals safety. Okay, that's why, right? So men will aggress because we're going to try to keep ourselves safe. We want to fight, right? Versus to be vulnerable is to be weak, right? When we feel we're not going to walk away from that fight because that's vulnerability, that's weakness, et cetera, right? So that's why it gets like that, right? And so that's, again, how we've been trained. That's how we've been taught. That's how we've been told to meet these threats, right? But in reality, this is not how people relate, right? If you want to relate to someone, if you want to build a relationship with someone, how do you accelerate that very quickly? Vulnerability equals safety. Vulnerability equals relationship, right? The more you open up, the more you connect with each other, the more you are able to bare your soul to someone, that creates much more relationship than the aggressive person, right? And so the opposite from threat scenarios to when relationship scenarios is true. And so if we're always told to aggress, taught to, pump up our chests, that does not build relationships. And relationships are part of what builds great leaders, right? And so again, this is another point to seeing why are certain characteristics valuable, right? So we want to see and we want to get the best leaders, okay? And so we've talked about this already in the emotional intelligence area, where we talked about how emotional intelligence is more valuable than intellectual abilities or IQ, right? Of course, everyone has to have competency, but at some level of ability, everyone has the competency. And so the people that need to go accelerate beyond this kind of this plateau is the people who have stronger emotional intelligence, right? So the intellectual abilities, the analytical, the strategic, the creative, those are all necessary, all valuable. And then the emotional, the self-awareness, the empathy, humility, all those kinds of things are also valuable. And so we need to try to figure out, where's our leader who has all of these things, right? So we need to think about who has the better mix of these characteristics, right? Again, there is no hard and fast, yes, it's women, or no, it's men. But we want to have people who are competent, able to do the job, as well as have the emotional wherewithal to run a business, to run people, to manage people, to have these traits, right? And so again, if you're a man, get them both. If you're a woman, get them both, right? There's no I'm a man, I have these things, or I'm a woman, I have these things. It's just whoever you are, get a good balance of both these sets of skills, and you're going to be poised for greater success. Another quote. To a significant degree, that's a reflection of limitations men almost inevitably develop in a culture that measures us by the ability to project strength and confidence, hide what we're feeling, including from ourselves, and define who we are, above all, by our external accomplishments and our capacity to prevail over others. This is a powerful quote, I think. I think this is where men have been taught to go, right? Feelings are weak. Again, we've come a long way. Your generation of gentlemen are far more in tune with your emotions than my generation was, right? So we've come a long way, but it's still very, very much a problem. Like if I asked a poll of all the gentlemen in the class, like when was the last time you had a good cry with your buddies? Or when was the last time you talked to your buddies about your feelings, right? It's going to be rare versus the women. I'm going to say it happens more often. And again, I'm not saying that's you need to be doing that necessarily, but you have to be open to it. You have to be able to do it. And so I share this all the time. Like I'll go golfing with my buddies. Four of us will go golfing. We'll be on the course. We're together for 5 hours, right? Eat together, golf together, whatever. We're out together for 5 hours, and then I go home and my wife will ask me like, so how is so and so, and how is their family? What's going on? And I was like, I have no idea. We didn't really talk at all. We just played golf, right? So, like, at least personally for me, I haven't been trained to connect emotionally with my male friends, right? It's something that we have not been taught how to do properly. At least some of us haven't, right? And so we have been taught a way to be that is not always healthy or effective in leadership positions, right? And so now let's kind of wrap this a little bit up. It's a men, and now let's say and women, right? So again, it's not a sex thing, it's not a gender thing, it is a characteristics thing. Um, we do not want to focus on measuring outcome versus um, not managing our emotions, right? We're too focused. Do not be too focused on this goal and figure out like how's this making people feel? How is it impacting your people? What's the emotional makeup or reaction of your people? And two, you have to understand that you want to manage people's emotions. You want people to feel good because in reality, people who feel better and people who are happy perform better, work better, are more loyal, right? So these are all good things. It's not just we want you to be more emotional, you want me to be more relational just for the heck of it. It is going to end up resulting in better run businesses, more efficient businesses. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about. What is good business leadership, right? You run a company that develops strong, loyal relationships. You're going to run a faster, better, more effective company. So, if all this is true, and we see that these characteristics exist a lot, and we see these characteristics not in some of these men in executive positions. Why is this happening? So there are several reasons. We're not really going to dive too deeply into any of them, but one, there's a glass ceiling. There is sexism. It exists. You cannot deny that sexism exists in the corporate world. It does. I know it does. Again, it is far better than it was 50 years ago, but it still exists. And we are slowly trying to get rid of it. And hopefully in my lifetime I'll see it gone, but I wouldn't bet money on that. Two, sexism, similar idea. Child rearing, and this is just a reality, right? There's no if people take a year off, not year off. If people don't work for a year in the corporate life and instead are raising a child at home, they're going to climb that ladder slower than someone who doesn't. That's reality. Which is why there needs to be also needs to be a push to have a more balanced kind of home life in terms of men choosing to stay home and women choosing to stay home. There needs to be a bit more balance, otherwise this kind of imbalance in corporate life is going to also be there, right? Aggression. Men have 7 to 8 times more testosterone than women, right? And so it was talked about in the Sheryl Sandberg thing, like men are going to get more salary, men are going to get more promotions, men are going to get more higher positions if more men are applying for them. That's not a flaw in men. That is a reality that if we go for the promotion, ask for the raise, and you don't, as a woman, you're not going to get that chance. right? And so that's also part of it, right? And that's part of what Cheryl Sandberg was talking about. It's about women going for it as much as it is about how good you are naturally, right? So, um, a few statements that I want to kind of leave with you that I think are, again, generalizations, but still have some truth to them. And I want you to examine them. I want you to reflect on them within yourself, as well as within your peer group, right? To kind of think about, is this true? Do I think about this? Am I like this? Am I, whatever, and whatever that means for you and how that might make you feel or perform. Address it and think about it, right? So one, men typically overvalue their strengths, right? Again, that's part of that confidence thing. Like they believe in themselves more than they should, but that's going to lead them to better promotions and all that kind of stuff. While women typically undervalue their strengths, right? Men tend to defend their doubts, right? They're going to defend themselves even if they probably know they're wrong. While women will tend to doubt themselves more, right? That again also happens all the time. Three, yeah. Men typically seek to win, while women typically seek to connect. Right? Agree or disagree with these statements. I'm not looking for your agreement. I'm looking for your reflection. Right? Think about these things. Think about yourself. Is this really how you are? Um, and do you need to change? Or do you need to at least look at yourself through a different lens or look at the world through a different lens a little bit to kind of figure out, what's going on here, right? Again, I'm not, you know, chastising men or women in either realm. It's just be better leaders. Develop characteristics to make yourself a better leader, right? And again, I'm not telling men to not value themselves. I want you to be supremely confident and go for everything, right? But these are just kind of windows into how people may think, right? I want people to seek to win. I also want people to seek to connect, right? So be very, very cognizant of what you need to look for and what you need to do to be better. A couple more quotes I want to leave you with. Leadership skills required to fuel great performance are far more nuanced and multidimensional today than ever before. The post industrial economy is indifferent to men's size and strength. What's this talking about? You could argue historically because of men's this physical strength advantage, size advantage, when there are things like farming or military or just manual labor, men are going to be able to do more generally, right? Those things don't matter anymore, right? We have machines, computers to do all the things that we need to do. Size and strength are not necessarily really an advantage, right? Even war, right? We're sending drones to fight wars, right? It doesn't matter, right? So your performance is not about your physical strength. It's about your mental capacity and about your ability to relate to people. Instead, we need more male leaders with the courage to stand down, comfortably acknowledge their shortcomings, and help those they lead feel safe and appreciated rather than fearful and inadequate. We need more women with the courage to step up, fully own their strengths, and lead with confidence and resolve while also holding on their humanity and their humility. Again, this is just a plea for us all to be better, to do better for the world, not just to do better for ourselves. So, what I want you to do is complete the reading, read What Women Know About Leadership That Men Don't, and also I want you to, on Edsby, respond to this quote. To a significant degree, that's a reflection of the limitations men almost inevitably develop in a culture that measures us by the ability to project strength and confidence, hide what we're feeling, including from ourselves, and define who we are above all by our external accomplishments and our capacity to prevail over others. Again, if you're a man, obviously, you know how you need to relate to this or talk about this. And if you're a woman, I want you to talk about what you see in the men in your life, what you see culture doing to us, right? And relate to that and how it, has it maybe impacted you or in people you love, whatever it may be. I want you to relate to that, what you see. So that's the lesson. This is going to wrap up our gender and leadership unit. Again, if you have any questions or thoughts, please send me an Esme message, and I'll try to get to that question as soon as I can. Thank you.